Now, to continue the narrative of the Enlightenment in the shadows, we'll jump ahead to 1865. And when we talk about race and incarceration, we'll go deeper into these moments. But let's just mention them here to get us back to the beginning of the carceral explosion. So, of course, in 1865, this marked the end of the Civil War and the instantiation of the 13th Amendment, which was the abolition of slavery. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So already that's the perfect example, and this is something that Ava DuVernay did exquisitely in her documentary, The 13th. But you get this immediate abolition and expansion of slavery and a purported expansion of freedom and access to the political process, but embedded inside of those commas is the immediate exclusion. So if you are incarcerated, then you can legally still be treated as a slave. So another moment of enlightenment would be 1870, the 15th Amendment, the right to vote. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Seems pretty clear to me, but as we know, not until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and even to this day, this right enshrined in the 15th Amendment was something that still excluded huge populations of people and still continues to exclude in other kind of pernicious ways, like the requirement for voter IDs, or as we saw in Florida, the granting of rights to formerly incarcerated persons, to returning citizens to vote, but also the way that was immediately kind of skirted around by requiring them to pay all of their debts before they had access to voting process, to enfranchisement. So there we go, 1870, 1970, 2020. We still have that right that's enshrined in a document that even the most patriotic American will say is central to the identity of the country and identity of Americans, but still so many are excluded from that political process. So other shadows that happened during this time. So immediately after the abolition of slavery and the expansion of the, at least in name, of the right to vote, you had to have ways of then further capturing this population, further excluding them. So some of the first ways that this was done were through what were called the Black Codes, and which are most famous for their vagrancy laws, where you could break the law simply by standing together with other persons of color, by appearing to not work, by appearing to not be a part of the productive economy. So loitering or just standing around would be the very reason. So just your presence, your being in space would be the very reason that you are committing a crime. We see this echoed in redlining and stop and frisk policies and the criminalization of just being in a space and looking a certain way or being around certain criminalized populations. This then became the convict lease system, or a new version of this was that not these people that were brought into the into the carceral net were then able to be leased out for public labor. So in 1898, some 73% of Alabama's entire state revenue came from convict leasing. So we'll look more into this, the infamous images of the chain gang and things like that. And then this, of course, led to the Jim Crow laws, which were de jure in the South, meaning they were like on the books, and de facto in the North. We've talked a little bit about Northern exceptionalism, the way that oftentimes the North, in terms of post-Civil War, pre- and post-Civil War categories of, Mason-Dixon line, would snub their nose down at the South as being those slaveholders, those backward looking states and kind of communities. But the same kind of racism and exclusion went on in the North, especially after the Great Migration. But it was done in more subtle and perhaps more pernicious ways through things like redlining. which we'll look at. So that's the way that the post-war country from 1865 up through the beginning of World War II was expanding these rights, at least in laws and rhetoric, but also very clearly excluding and casting these large shadows on the margins and the forgotten and neglected and oppressed populations of this country.